Welcome to Exercises for Pelvic Engagement. This is actually part 2 of 4 from the series, and we're going to be talking about today the exercises specific to engaging your horse's pelvic girdle, improve that hind limb engagement. I love to keep things simple. I like to explain things as best I can in a simplistic model because that's how I work. I like to keep it easy and relatable to horses. I'm a practical person. I can read something a million times, but unless I actually apply it in practice, it doesn't really stick. So what I'm sharing with you today is information that I've experienced and I've put together over the 25 to almost 30 years working with horses. First of all, who am I? My name is Nika. I am an activity animal chiropractor and deep tissue massage therapist. I also specialize in laser therapy as well, which I find complements my work quite nicely. However, I have a massive dream and mission to help inspire and educate horse owners to solve their horses' struggles because everyone is individual. However, I do truly believe that how we can solve all these problems is by coming together and working as a team. So today we are going to talk about why the pelvis. I'm going to give you just a slight overview on anatomy because if you missed part 1 of this series, I went deep into the pelvic anatomy and specifically like different muscle groups, their importance of form and function. So today's just a bit of an overview because the key is the exercise part. I'd like to talk to you about kind of exercises for pelvic engagement from a rehabilitation perspective, and then talk about the specific techniques, both in hand and stable based, and then progress to some of the ridden exercises as well. So why this topic? And for me, this topic is really, really important because I often get called out to see horses because owners are saying to me, my horse is struggling with hind limb engagement, particularly the competition horses, your elite show jumpers, dressage, eventers. But to be honest, even your people who enjoy hacking, and that's absolutely not a problem. But I do find this is quite a common problem and issue that people are struggling with is hind limb engagement. So before we deep dive into exercises to improve it, I'm just going to explain why this is misunderstood. So I just went for a Google. I like to just keep things simple, as I said. And actually Googling hind limb engagement in horses came with a lot of results, like a top problem that people are Googling. And this was what they summarized. So they said, Google said, engagement is the bending of the hind leg joints, specifically articulation of the pelvis, stifles, hocks, and fetlocks, enabling the horse to shift their weight off its front legs and carry more weight behind. Now, if we think about this, it's not too far off. However, I do feel there's a lot of emphasis on things like bending, okay, so flexion of the hind leg joints, particularly the distal limbs. So in the horse would be like the stifles, hocks, and fetlocks. And how many of you know of horses that have had things like their stifles, hocks injected because they have been correctly diagnosed under radiography or arthroscopy, and if identified an issue, not significant, but say there is an issue there, treated with medication, and still there's no real transformation in the overall way of going. There might be like a subtle sign and a subtle improvement in the horse's ability to engage. However, it's normally short-lived. I am being quite general here. And I truly believe that this is from the lack of understanding of particularly the pelvis, the pelvic girdle, the pelvic matrix, and how the pelvis is attached to the spine of the horse. This, for me, is probably the main reason why it's commonly misunderstood and why we have kind of short-term results when we are medicating joints without corrective exercises afterwards. So I'm going to talk about the importance of pelvic engagement. And when we think about this, yes, we think about the horse working through their back, engaging their core, lifting up on their forehand, so their shoulders, their thoracic sling coming up, and then engaging the core, tucking that pelvis, and then the hind leg has got somewhere to reach underneath the rider, underneath the horse's back and core, in the direction of the front legs, and then push out for propulsion, and that gives you that kind of pushing. When your horse is engaged, for those of you that have sat on a horse that is truly working through their back and from behind, you'll feel this like uphill balance. They'll feel smooth, the transitions will feel smooth, the lateral exercises will have more freedom, more fluency, and will just feel as one. There's none of this interruption of you feel like the forehand's going one way and the hindquarters are kind of trailing behind. Everything is moving and working as one. The components of engagement, in my opinion, include, first of all, going forward. And this is important because I think a lot of people end up using contraptions on horses for more engagement or more collection. However, if your horse isn't traveling forwards, how are they going to be able to utilize the entire body? And then you almost find horses get stuck. And again, I'm a massive advocate for no gadgets really, and allowing the horse to find the balance on their own from the ground. We'll get into that. Another component of engagement for me after the forwardness is the suppleness. And again, this comes particularly when we talk about engagement, the suppleness of the lumbosacral junction, the coxofemoral joint. These two areas for me are really important when it comes to hind-limb engagement, but obviously we cannot ignore the entire system. For example, the abdominals, and the key as well, which we often forget, even though we're focusing on the hindquarters, we need the trunk and the thoracic sling, the shoulder girdle, to be stable, secure, and strong, and be able to push off the front hooves upward, so that the hind leg has somewhere to go underneath the horse's body. And the third component for me in pelvic engagement is straightness. And this is quite common as therapists, that we often see horses might have a lack of engagement from behind and struggle, even despite having intervention from a veterinarian, because they have an asymmetry through the pelvic girdle. And as I've become more experienced in and seeing different horses with displaying different compensations of pelvic asymmetry, I've noticed that it's not always a straightforward solution of adjusting the pelvis. It is so complicated and misunderstood when you don't know the muscle attachments and their form and function. Because I have noticed through case studies that I'll be sharing with you in later series that in some cases, if there is a chronic long-term pelvic asymmetry going on, which is affecting the engagement of the horse, then this, or I might actually be contraindicating by doing a pelvic adjustment because of the contraction and the torsion and the weakness of the muscles that are holding that pelvis in place. And sometimes by doing a simple adjustment can maybe be counterproductive to what this horse needs at their stage of training. So in a nutshell, straightness is a key component of hind limb engagement. So just to go through those three, we've got forwardness is key, suppleness, and straightness. The other thing we need to think about as well from the ridden perspective here is, we're so focused on the horse and their ability and how it can improve their engagement, but what about the rider? Is the rider sitting straight? How are their skills? How is their riding technique with connection from their seat bones through the horse's mouth? And what I mean by that is their contact, their elastic contact. Do they have any asymmetries, but also they're someone who's quite heavy in the hand? Now, if you're heavy in the hand and you're not allowing the horse to go forward and work on that suppleness, the straightness, and you're preventing the front part of the horse, the thoracic sling, the shoulder girdle, to not travel, how can the hind limb come underneath the horse? How has the hind limb got anywhere to go? And this is why we can't ignore the rider factor in terms of their straightness, their elastic contact, but also from a ridden perspective, say you have a rider that's quite well balanced, has quite good feel contact, and not heavy with their hands, but how are they training the horse? So I know I've spoken about forward momentum in the beginning, but does the horse or is the horse trained in half halt? Because we need the foundations of training like half halt to be important. So the horse has the understanding of the subtle changes of coming back and varying the pace within the gait so that they can build up to more Hindlimb engagement. It doesn't just mean that a horse is going from traveling in quite a forward momentum to suddenly stopping and engaging the hindquarters. We know that's a process, and it's a process that is done through half halt training. Again, this is my opinion. And then on the complete opposite, for those of you that know and see and have probably sat on a horse that is completely disengaged and lacking pelvic engagement, you know how it feels. They feel disconnected, they feel unbalanced, they can move with their hindquarters in one direction and, almost like crabbing the whole time. And they can feel really heavy in the hand, and they can be tripping, things like this. And all of this comes under one like bracket of what we often know as not being engaged from behind. So in a nutshell, in my opinion, we can't ignore when we talk about pelvic engagement exercises is the idea of balance. And again, I know I've spoken about how horses are in previous webinars, how horses are naturally built on the forehand by percentage compared to the hindquarters. So if physics wise, we are already at a detriment. And this is why our training is so important, and also why it's a gradual, progressive training, depending on horses' conformation, age, and any underlying pathology. So the element of balance for me is so important, because we need to be asking ourselves, how does the horse balance naturally, which I've kind of explained then. What is our goal with balance from a rider perspective, but also from the in-hand perspective? Because as I've just mentioned, yes, we know we want them to engage the hindquarters, but if they are naturally, if you look at the first image here, weight on the forehand, shifted the weights too much in the forehand, we can't straight away expect them to shift the balance and have the weight all the way on the hindquarters. There has to be in this blue arrow here a progressive stage, and this is where we're going to talk about some exercises that I would recommend doing to improve that. But why is this balance so important? For me, the balance is an important element in Hindlimb engagement because it reduces the risk of injury. A lot of horses that sustain front limb injuries, soft tissue more than say bony, however, obviously they go hand in hand, it can take a long time to recover because of this training element of us trying to push more weight onto the hindquarters. The other reason it's really important to train our horses to come more onto the hindquarters is to improve the horse's rideability. And again, this goes back to the case I've mentioned about when horses are heavy on the forehand and they are not taught to engage their core and sit, it can really make it uncomfortable, not only to ride, but for them, it puts excess pressure on their joints, because naturally they carry more weight on the front end. But then you've got the rider, the tack, and it all kind of the forces all and the pressure is all naturally going heavy onto the forehand. What causes things of loss of balance? We can't ignore this. I'm just going to summarize this for us, but it's things like we've mentioned them before. So the unbalanced rider, the incorrect training from riders and trainers, kind of poor hoof balance. Tack is a massive issue. I think tack is a very big cause of lameness in horses, ill-fitting tack. Poor preparation, and for me this is this gradual preparation of teaching horses, yes, you need to go forward, we need to work on your suppleness, your straightness, but we also need to teach you the little subtle signs of half halt, just slowly encouraging you to transfer weight onto the back end. And from a static perspective, in my opinion, that is the stable-based exercises, which we will get onto. I've spoken about horses that are out of balance. They feel heavy. They can almost look intimately lame in front. And you often see this I see this quite a lot in your big moving warm bloods that are actually quite weak between the ages of 4 to 7 years old and are doing quite high level. They actually come out a little bit lame in front. You can see the head nod, you can see the shortness in the strides, you can see the asymmetry, the head nod, but as they work, they suddenly look sound and they're moving better. The stride length is even. And you think to yourself, well, is this just an idiopathic lameness as it's been called in the past, or actually is this because this horse hasn't been given the correct training, correct warm up and time to teach them from the beginning to come onto the hindquarters? And obviously with work it does improve. It's just things like that that are important to consider. Just want to overview on this because, like I said, this was mainly touched on in the first part 1 of the series, which was the pelvic girdle anatomy. And for me, the area obviously we're talking about here is circled in red, but I'm going to specifically talk about muscle groups that I feel are really vital when it comes to hind limb engagement. And we spoke about this before, but for me, it's the flexion part of the hind limb, which is mainly caused by a group of muscles called the iliopsoas, divided into so it's major, minor, and iliacus, with obviously the help of muscles like the tensor fasciator, rectus femoris, quadriceps, which are your cranial-femoral muscles, and then they create the shortening effect of the hindquarters, the hind limb, and then you have the lengthening, which is in that propulsion phase, which is your caudal-femoral, so those are your glutes, and your semitendinosus, semimembranosus. Again, I deep dived into this last time, so have a little look at the one before. So common pelvic engagement issues I tend to find out at practice. The first thing we need to rule out, and we all know this, is pain, 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 pain. Is there an underlying pathology? Is there a reason this horse has a pelvic asymmetry? Is there a reason they are moving like this? We always take long history, so we know with the whole story. We also need to consider things like the reciprocal apparatus and the stay apparatus, which, again, if you'd like more information on this, just let me know, but I have written some blogs on this. The reciprocal and stay apparatus are unique systems to the horse in terms of the horse has them as part of their survival mechanism. The reciprocal in particular helps the flexion extension of the hock and stifle, making it really fluent and almost second nature to a horse, so they can obviously escape from danger and things like that. And the stay apparatus we also know as they allows the horse to sleep standing up. But the reason I put this in is because if the horse has got any stifle or hock issues or coxofemoral joint issues, lumbosacral issues, do we or should we also be considering these apparatus, and are they compromised when we think about pelvic engagement issues? Because they've been adapted to help the horse survive and flee from danger. So common dysfunction of pelvic engagement issues, for me, the top 4 are dysfunction of the lumbosacral joint, and this is because of the attachments, as I previously mentioned, from a muscular perspective, the coxofemoral joints, so the hip joints, and then quite commonly are front limb lamenesses that have been undiagnosed, and this is because they then are shifting weight naturally onto the hindquarters, and you think, well, isn't that the point? However, what happens is when horses put more weight onto their hindquarters, because they're trying to alleviate the pain from the front end, it actually then causes excess stress and strain when the horses aren't strong enough to carry themselves behind. And then, as I've mentioned from a previous slide, if they haven't got the stability and soundness in front to lift their trunk up, their thoracic sling, the hindquarters have absolutely nowhere to go. And that's why lameness issues can definitely affect pelvic engagement. And head and neck positioning. Head and neck positioning is so fundamental in engagement. And often we think and we believe that we should always have our horses working like a long and low frame. I don't really agree with this term. I think it's very much dependent on the horse's stage of training, their posture, their natural movement, so their breeding, etc. But I've read papers and studies where if the horse's head and neck is too low, it actually causes dysfunction of the iliopsoas and actually restricts the iliopsoas from contracting properly and allowing that horse to flex the hind leg and bring it forward. So, I think we have to be very careful when we watch horses work in and their head and neck positioning is so low, are they actually trying to alleviate pain as opposed to, oh, it's correct because it's long and low. So moving on to exercises to improve the pelvic engagement. First of all, we need to ask ourselves, what is the aim? I am a massive advocate for collaboration and team approach. And the more I am getting involved in this, the more I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's needed more than ever, because there is so much more that we can do when we come together and we work as a collective, as opposed to a single therapist on their own. You can get into the solution a lot quicker. You also have the support of one another, because how can we know everything? We don't know everything. We have specialists in each area, but it is so important that we are all communicating, and it more than anything, it gives the owner clarity. So obviously, key in any form of exercise program is full history, accurate diagnosis and assessment. And this is of the entire posture, dynamic, and from a written perspective. This is some of the research that I have followed and looked into. There is actually a few other studies as well that I've just not added in. There is more and more research supporting the use, and I know Hilary Clayton, she's a big one on stable-based exercises and pole exercises. However, it's still not well supported. We need loads more research before this can happen. We also know that the main aim of rehabilitation and any form of exercise training program is to help the horse return to full function, but it must be done progressively with regular monitoring and reflection. And this is where this team approach for me really comes into play. The goal as well, I think we need to think about from exercises, is the short-term goal, the long-term goal. Short-term goal is for me, it's to increase the tolerance to work, but gradually. Whereas your long-term goal is obviously getting the horse back to full work, full fitness. And I think this is a really clear and important factor to talk about with your owner, is that say if they've had intervention from either a distal limb problem that's been medicated, it's then to sit down and say, right, this is our short-term goal, this is our long-term goal, and we're going to work backwards from that. Because a lot of owners, especially early on, they have a diagnosis and they think that's it, on the merry way. But the reality is there's a process now afterwards that we need to think about to ensure that we're not missing anything, but also give the horse's body time to adapt. And this is what goes nicely into exercise progressions for me, starting from the ground stable, and then progressing slowly to in-hand. And that can be depending very much on the owner's skill level and management, but moving to lunging, long lining. I'm a massive advocate for long lining and working from the horse's nose, and then progressing that to a ridden walk program, and then so on and so forth. The key with exercise progression is to change one variable at a time. And this is again depending on the time frame of what the owner has, the owner's management, the approach you have, the collective approach you have with the vet. But it's how you change the intensity, the frequency, the gradient. I often find horses out of practice have something injected and it's straight away like 2 days of box rest or 2 days off, and then back to ridden hacking. So a lot of that in between period gets ignored. So again, warning here, these exercises are a collection of my own research, case studies, and CPD hours. I'd always recommend anyone to do your own research and work with your vet to ensure you're performing them correctly, but also they're right for your client's horse. So don't try and have a blanket approach and have the same treatment for everything. You need to take responsibility for it. And as I put the warning here, these are exercises that I've put together after numerous case studies, but also working alongside my owners and the vets to know what works for that animal. So my 3 stable-based exercises for pelvic engagement are tail traction exercises, caudal pelvic tilts, and abdominal lifts. And if you reference back to the anatomy, these are why these exercises work for me. So the tail traction can be done in the stable, anywhere really, even before they are ridden. And this involves a straight tail traction, which activations, the optimum time is between 6 to 10 seconds. And then I'd move on to some lateral traction. The caudal pelvic tilts. With this exercise, you can vary the intensity and the duration. You just have to see what's in front of you, but I'd really recommend doing it slowly. Obviously, there's a massive risk for this exercise of kicking, so owners have to be so careful, and I'd always make sure that I would do the exercise first, watch the unit of the exercise to make sure that there are no issues. And I'd always say to my owner, if they're doing it when I'm not there and there is an issue or the horse is moving away or showing signs if they don't want it, stop and rather get me out instead of trying to do it on your own. We also want to make sure we're not causing a reflex effect when doing this exercise, and that we are doing the slow activation of the hindquarters, the extensor muscular chain, as opposed to the lengthening of the extensor muscular chain, but the contraction of those muscles around the coxofemoral joint. It's a slow movement. Same thing with abdominal lift, similar to the caudal pelvic tilt. This exercise has many safety issues, and again, demo with the owner, and then I'd get my owners to demo it themselves before just going straight into it, because the hind legs, especially in mares, can be quite tricky. Dynamic based exercises, so this can be progressive from the stable based. Again, there is a time frame to that, so don't guess. Speak to your professionals, speak to your team, speak to your owner. For me, this includes, and again, from groundwork, long reining, and then ridden, transitions. I cannot recommend transitions enough. You can vary the quality, the intensity, obviously progress slowly from each gait, but it is throughout the scales of training, transitions are key. Circles are something, again, to progress to from helping hindlimb engagement. And this can, again, depend on if the horse has a pathology. Would have to vary the circle size, the duration, the frequency. However, there's no underlying pain. It's just a case of improving more hindlimb engagement. There is a study on circles and the effect on the core engagement and recruitment of postural deep muscles in the back, and the circle exercises are great for that. Again, watch your owner before, or I'd always recommend my owners watch me do it before I give them the homework, and then progressing depending on the pathology, but if there's no pain, to slowly steps of lateral work. Just remember though that we're incorporating components of hindlimb engagement, which is the forward momentum, the straightness and the suppleness, before moving straight into these. As we've mentioned, when you're incorporating these exercises into any treatment plan, or owners are taking this treatment plan forward, I really think it's important that you work with a team. Guessing is just not the way forward. Teamwork is definitely key, and it takes away the guesswork. It takes away the not knowing, and it also gives reassurance to the owner, but also you as a therapist. We have to be realistic, and there's no one recipe suits all, so there's always some room for error. And this is why regular monitoring is so important, and make it progressive, slow and progressive. And this is the key with any form of exercise program. It's the the progression that's key, but it's when you change the exercise intensity and duration. So in summary, Hindlimb engagement. First of all, to improve it, we need to understand the full history of the horse. We need to work with a team of professionals. If there is no pain and it's just a weakness, a training issue, we can prescribe a progressive plan with the exercises we've spoken about. However, if there is pain and diagnosis, or it's being diagnosed, that is when you really, really need your team approach to create a specific plan tailored to the owner. And this is when you can progress depending on the diagnosis to stable, then in hand. Again, you can see my arrows always go back to the team approach for reflection, monitoring, and then from the in hand progression to the ridden. So it's all quite simple in terms of, we probably know this already, but it's just highlighting the importance of taking it extremely slow, but with a team approach, and working carefully with each owner. Any questions you have, please let me know. My email is info@animalchiropractoruk.com. I'm on socials as well, and I look forward to seeing you in part 3 and